Okay, welcome to week 6. To address a couple of things, some people on the discussion forums mentioned that there were some problems with the technical quality of the videos. I've muted my phone, so hopefully I'll continue to remember to do that, and that won't be an issue. But there's also some concerns about the audio quality, as well as as well as the camera going out of focus when I write on the board. I'm working on fixing that now. Right now, I'm still using the equipment that I normally use. Just so you know, when I taught this class, I've taught this class several times, but when I taught it 2 years ago, I started where I would be, writing on an iPad and screen recording that. That just started to get very bad because it began to get very laggy very quickly. iPad and Surface both have the same problem. It just was not working out well. And there's essentially no fix that I could find to it. Everything I looked online was like, yeah, that just happens sometimes. So that's why I'm recording this way rather than like screencasting. So I think what I'm going to do before I can like get hopefully better equipment, I'm looking at several options around the university now. I'm going to write bigger on the board here. Hopefully that will help with the blur. I think the other issue is that this is a very nice board that I have here, with a kind of, it's glass with a white background. I didn't want one of these boards. I wanted just a classical chalkboard, which would not have some of the, I think part of the focus problem is due to the board having this sort of glassy background, or being glass and not being, not being a normal either whiteboard or chalkboard. Okay. So week 6, we are going to continue discussing first order partial differential equations. We're going to start in section 4 of chapter 5. This is called Conservation Laws Revisited. We're going to look at conservation laws again. We're going to come up with conservation laws applied in several different contexts, so you can kind of get an idea of what laws exist and how they come to be in real life. We're going to analyze different differential equations or different Cauchy problems that come up with these different conservation laws. And what we're going to see is we're going to start looking at quasi-linear equations. In other words, the coefficient functions a and b in the first order PDE can now depend on the solution u. And what happens when we look at that, there's going to be new things that happen when we see that. We're also going to look, before we get to that, that'll be later this week, before we get to that, we're going to look to see what happens, even for a linear PDE, we're going to look more to see what happens when our initial conditions are discontinuous. So like our function on gamma, the gamma curve from the Cauchy problem, when the data or the function on that curve is discontinuous, we're going to start to see different features that are just different than when you look at ordinary differential equations. And so we're going to spend, roughly a day's worth of time, like if it was a lecture, it'd be a day of a lecture, so to speak, just looking at linear PDEs from a slightly different perspective and with discontinuous data on gamma, as well as kind of deriving different conservation laws. And then we're going to start looking at what happens when we look at quasi-linear equations. Quasi-linear equations with what we're going to see is going to be discontinuous initial data, and we're going to see what happens in quasi-linear equations. So it's going to be basically two different things that happen, or two different types of complications that can arise. One is something called an expansion wave, and one is something called a shock wave. This week we're going to talk about expansion waves. Next week we're going to talk about shock waves. So you might notice that right now week 7 doesn't have anything about first order PDEs, but there actually will be, just because it's going to take a little bit longer than I anticipated talking about some of this stuff. And also, like, I think about this as being a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class in some senses, but this Friday is the 4th of July, so it's kind of a less lecture-heavy week anyways. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you guys in the discussions. I like that you guys are doing really great in the discussions, bringing up some great questions, some great alternative or more like in-depth explanations in the discussions, bringing in stuff that you have from your own experience. Keep doing that. I really enjoy it.